This is a short introduction to ecosystem-based sustainable development, and I partly refer also to the corresponding chapter in the textbook Humans and the Global Ecosystem. Humans live and depend on ecosystems that provide goods and services that include materials for construction or commodities, food, and many other services that we produce in the landscape, which often is optimized according to human ideas and needs, ever more reducing space for nature that is living in self-organized ecosystems, and then people do reshape mountains and exchange species according to their ideas and needs. For example, replacing species-rich and complex rainforest ecosystems by eucalypt plantations, as we can see here in the Mata Atlântica in Brazil. Humans introduce straight lines to the landscape. They put order to nature, which also means they simplify structure and functions. Where we would have complex ecosystems with many species interacting, they, for example, implement monocultures. Here in the picture, the Scots pine being planted in northern Germany, in Brandenburg. These systems often are vulnerable to different threats such as fires or pests, and often calamities are the result, which are also harmful in terms of sustainable development and that imply substantial socioeconomic costs. Nevertheless, the conventional practices follow the lines of ecosystem engineering, often working against the natural processes, and even after having bad experience, such as a wildfire, humans tend to redesign their simplified systems for getting back, for example, the monoculture that here was lost. In times of climate change, this is facing ever more and intensive challenges, and the question arises if, an alternative approach can be to work more with nature rather than against nature. As here in this example of the burned forest site, we can see ecosystems themselves are regenerating. There are solutions to problems and even calamities, and this would be an example of a nature-based solution here to the need of restoring a forest ecosystem. Nature-based solutions that can be pretty efficient, but open-ended, of course, and not really foreseeable which species when would grow here again, and if these tree species, for example, are including the target species demanded by the market. So therefore some conflicts arise. In recent years, especially with growing awareness of the human-made problems in the global ecosystems, also induced by climate change, the so-called nature-based solutions come to the focus of the conservation and sustainable development agendas. And these nature-based solutions clearly combine the work with ecosystems, biodiversity, targeting benefits for biodiversity, but also combining and connecting it to human well-being. The nature-based solutions increasingly are, well, more systematically defined and classified, and embrace solutions such as restoration or also adaptation to climate change. The ecosystem-based adaptation is one of the pioneer approaches in the context of nature-based solutions, where there is also a link to ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and there are other approaches that can be seen as rediscovering nature and making better use of the natural forces and capacities for human livelihoods and human benefits, targeting human well-being. The ecosystem-based approaches have been especially promoted in the context of aquatic and oceanic marine ecosystems, and there are also examples of more complex systems, including mountains and watersheds. And of course, the question arises what ecosystems are, and in general, they are respected, obviously, as complex entities with multiple processes that, are emerging from the interactions of different components, and where the people are part of the dynamics, human-made disturbance or management influencing the species that are relevant, as well as physical, biochemical, and other processes. The ecosystem is a term which is going back to, Greek language oikos, and systema, a Greek Latin term which refers to a bigger whole, an organized whole, which is comprising parts or components, and which together form a certain order. And we know these depictions of ecosystems where different species interact, for example, being producers such as plants, or consumer species, animals that eat the plants and live on that, and also including the distrends, fungi in the soil, bacteria, and leading to the fact that this bigger whole is functioning, is becoming a functional unit. The complexity of these ecosystems possibly is much bigger than we thought for a long time. It's less clear nowadays what a species is, or even an individual, as we discover that, especially the higher organisms, such as animals or humans, represent supraorganisms, where it's not just the human component, but also, bacteria living within and on the higher organisms and influencing the overall function. So increasingly, for example, in medicine, humans themselves are seen as a small ecosystem, a supra-organism, where the so-called microbiome, all the bacteria and microorganisms are living and evolving together with the higher organism, which anyway is also composed complexly by different cells and interacting elements. Consequently, our concept of ecosystems is becoming more, well, difficult in a way, more integrated, where these interactions go far beyond only predation or simple symbiosis such as pollination, and where especially the microorganisms play a crucial role in the functioning. And in a way, for a long while, ecosystems themselves have been called supraorganisms or eco-holobionts, uh, uh, an hypothesis which is already some decades old, but is gaining momentum again. The other component of the word ecosystem is eco, which goes back to oikos, and that is the house, the dwelling place, an old Proto-Indo-European word actually, and which refers to the husbanding capacities of these systems. So by interacting all the different component parts of the ecosystem, the species, individuals, and also the populations and the genes, and so on and so forth. The emergent property is that the system is processing and handling scarce resources such as energy, nutrients, or water. And so this is very important, especially the understanding of ecosystems as energetic entities has been of revolutionary importance in the development of ecological theory, ecosystem theory, which we, well, will not touch further here in this first introduction, but is very relevant for the understanding of the functioning of ecosystems. What we have to summarize clearly, that ecosystems are consisting of components, and that these components start to interact, and this leads to processes, to change, um, often of the components themselves, and these components, well, become a bigger whole. So there are entities that are created with open boundaries, and these entities, um, well, have functions and depend on the functions, and they are, well, living on permanent input of resources, especially energy, which then is processed within the system, and there's always an output, but it's also a matter of efficiency, how a functional a system can be. And when this system is, really working with the resources and the energy, there is the production of services that can be used or that are crucial for the um, maintenance of certain components, such as the humans that use ecosystem functions and call them ecosystem services, no? by harvesting certain outputs produced by the system. Developing such an idea or concept of ecosystems, it's the question: what is relevant? What are ecosystems? Is it the components? Is it the form? Or is it actually the function? Yes, possibly being much more important. And if we talk about ecosystem-based solutions, ecosystem-based sustainable development, so what is this concept about? Possibly a lot about functions, um, maybe more than the human interests. Even if we as humans want to extract goods and services, it is highly relevant that the entities do function. In this context, in, well, the evolution of the ecosystemic cosmovision, a relevant question is, where do we stand? What is the position of people? Do we stand outside ecosystems and using these systems as exploitable resource, or actually, well, shall we understand that we are an integral part of the ecosystem? This would be a key concept actually of the ecosystem approach. Humans, humankind, a dependent component of the functional units of the ecosystems. And if we recognize this on the basis of natural sciences, ideally this then also is translated into societal values. We would follow or develop an ecosystem ethics as a normative basis, and where we then would understand, yes, if we are a dependent component part, we have well, the duty to work within this system that it well, may function sustainably without being irreversibly damaged, function not only for its own sake but also for the subsistence of present humans and future generations. And this then is the very fundament of the sustainability concept. An ecosystem ethics would involve due respect for the emergent properties. So what do ecosystems need for properly functioning? What do they need for being able to self-organize and also adapt to changing environmental conditions? And ultimately, yes, ecosystem ethics would be very much rooted in the awareness that humans are a dependent component of the global ecosystem, and which means that then all people need to have access to information on the status of the ecosystem and the management that changes the living conditions. And in this context, ecosystem ethics also would embrace a participatory approach, giving people the rights to, well, be part of the management, to understand decisions, influence decisions that change the wider ecosystems. So in a way, ecosystem-based sustainable development is a concept that is based on the functioning of ecosystems. It's ecosystem based, but it can also put the humans into the center of the concept, and so this is not a contradiction. Conserving ecosystems and protecting human rights, the rights of living beings, depending on the functionality of the bigger whole. So an ethical concept to be further explored and more intensively discussed now would be the eco-humanism, which, however, is another topic. Referring to UNESCO biosphere reserves, they seem to be the ideal places for understanding and developing and promoting the concept of ecosystem-based and anthropocentric sustainable development, which definitely means that we have to move away from ecosystem destruction, a destructive ecosystem exploitation, and come to an approach that safeguards and fosters the self-organization of the bigger systems, that very much takes care of the regulating functions which are vital for the sustained existence of the bigger system. This approach necessarily includes the due respect to the limits to growth, especially if this refers to human needs and demands and the extent of manipulation of the natural ecosystems. And this concept also embraces naturally the adaptation to changing conditions, the adaptation to climate change, where we ideally learn to use ecosystems in a clever way, to adapt effectively and successfully to the changes that are unavoidable. And this then is a very comprehensive approach to sustainable landscape and finally earth management.